All right. Welcome, guys. Mike Sarraille, the founder of Talent War Group. Thank you for joining us again. I've got a great panel today. And today we're going to discuss, is your talent acquisition team settling for mediocrity? It's actually going to go a lot deeper than that because, guys, I think that question is a subset of performance. Are you encouraging anything but high performance within your organization, which goes to leadership and culture. But again, Mike Sarraille, let me go around the room. I want to introduce you to this highly experienced panel. I'm going to start with JJ, Josh Johnson.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, JJ. It's only because my boss, who's also on the panel, is Josh, and since he signs my paycheck, he gets to keep the name. But I'm the Director of Training and Leadership Development here at West Shore Home. I'm a retired Army Special Forces Sergeant Major.
Josh Wood, to you.
Yep. Josh Wood, I'm the Chief Development Officer at West Shore Home. I've been in talent acquisition for over 20 years, been with West Shore Home for 5, and just leading the talent acquisition strategy and the training strategy here as we grow this business.
Hey, Josh, really quick before we go to Jason Gardner, give them a sense of how rapidly you guys are growing and just a little bit of the history of the company, because this story, I love this American company.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So started about 14, 15 years ago. I joined the company 5 years ago. We had about 80 employees, 85 employees, and about 18 million in revenue. Right now, we're at 5 years later, about 1,300 employees and approaching 600 million in revenue, on a path to $1 billion. The last 2 to 3 years, we've doubled year over year, both headcount and revenue. So yeah, it's truly a rocket ship.
I love how people always talk about how they've doubled in headcount. And I know you're not saying that as a point of pride, but it points to the growth. Like doubling in headcount is not always a great thing. I think some of you will agree. Not necessarily adding volume is good, but for your organization, and I know the precedence that you guys put on assessment and selecting people into the organization with a lot of diligence, it has built an amazing company, and I'm excited to watch how that continues to grow. And I will turn over to one of my first mentors in the SEAL teams, who was not a raging a-hole, and actually made me very much enjoy my first few years in the SEAL teams. Jason.
Hey, I'm Jason Gardner. I'm an Echelon Front leadership instructor and retired SEAL Master Chief, and was a Command Master Chief.
Jim, welcome back.
Thanks, man. Good to be back. Jim Brown, founder and general partner at Arena Growth Partners, West Point undergrad, and was a scout and attack helicopter pilot in the Army.
Good, Jim. Yeah, I know it's been a while since you've been on, so we were excited to have you back. Guys, I'm going to jump into this. So that's the introduction. You can understand the wealth of experience of this panel with the exception of me. But I put the group together, so I have the luxury of hosting them. So, is your hiring team settling for mediocrity? Whether the answer is yes or no, this really stems and goes back to the book, The Talent War, that George Randall and I wrote on how special operations and great organizations win on talent. Why did we select the special operations community? Yes, I retired out of there. So did Jason and Josh. But the model is sound, and you'll understand why. So the level of talent coming into your organization ultimately depends on who you have assessing and selecting. And again, we wrote about this in the book. A players select A players. There's a reason the Army Special Forces community pulls some of their best battlefield commanders off the line and put them in charge of training, because they are A players who have the ability to check their egos, to recognize talent, even potential young men and women who are better than them, who will take the organization to the next level. And that's rare. That hurts any organization. That's like me telling you to take your top sales leader offline and put them in charge of hiring the next 10 sales leaders over the next 6 months to 1 year. That sort of defies logic. But if you look at it from a long-term strategic perspective, that actually has a very, very exponential effect on your organization. All right, here's a human truth, because we're going to dive into the larger subject here, which is mediocrity existing in the organization. And here's the human truth: mediocrity exists in all organizations. Jason, Josh Johnson, Josh Wood or Jim Brown are not going to sit here and say we've been part of an organization that didn't have mediocrity in it. That's not the truth. When I hear people talk about that in sort of hyperboles, like our organization doesn't allow mediocrity, I think of the old Texas adage, all hat, no cattle. If I came in and watched you, it's the big talk, watched your people for a week, I guarantee I would identify some mediocrity amongst your personnel. This ultimately comes down to two things. The level of mediocrity in your organization comes down to leadership and culture, man. And if there's mediocrity, a great level of mediocrity within your organization, you as a leader have no one else to blame but yourself. So I sort of go into four subjects with regards to this. First, you often hear, or I often hear, leaders who complain about underperformance. But when I sort of push back and say, okay, you've identified some underperformers, some mediocre performers, what have you done about it? It's usually silence. And if you haven't set expectations, if you haven't clearly sat people down and explained to them what their roles and responsibilities are, and then ultimately how that impacts the organization, then that's the start. Maybe they're not raising their hand, which they should be proactive to raise their hand if there's ambiguity and say, hey, I'm not clear on what my roles and responsibilities are or how I'm being measured. Second, have you provided the training, the tools, and have you built a relationship with them, setting them up to be successful? If you haven't, then again, that comes back on you. The old plug and play does not work. I don't care if you poached a marketing manager from a competitor who has 10 years of experience and just pluck them and put them into the marketing director role within your company and expect them to perform. Some do, but most won't, because they're stepping into a different culture, and that takes time to build that relationship and make sure they understand your left and right lateral limits, how your organization operates, what's acceptable and unacceptable, and to ensure that they're a team player. Third, this is where I will tell you, go read John Doerr's book, Measure What Matters. It's all about OKRs, objectives and key results. A lot of people call those KPIs, and how it transformed the culture of Google, especially in terms of accountability. Now, the reason I bring this up is often people are underperforming because their leaders have either not given them guidance, or their guidance was just so vague, it wasn't clear, it's fuzzy, or in some instances, the stretch goals were so ludicrous, of course they were not going to meet them. And when they don't meet these excessive goals, they're viewed as mediocre performers. And then lastly, and I know Josh and JJ and Jason are going to weigh in on this, I think the special operations community did this particularly well. Given my experience in the private sector, though limited, it's do you allow, or do you lack, I should say, do you lack accountability in your organization? And really, when I say accountability, I'm reinforcing two things, because me as a boss, I can't be looking over the shoulders of my people at all times. So I've got to build a culture that really has two types of accountability in my eyes. One, self-accountability, where people have the discipline to do what's right. And if things go wrong, they have the discipline to raise their hand and say, hey guys, just so you know, I messed this up. This is what happened. This is what I'm going to do about it. And they call themselves out, and they create this culture where people are not fearful of raising their hand and admitting mistakes and then taking action to correct them. But more importantly is pure accountability. Within special operations, they almost safeguard high performance. We are very sensitive about it. We for the most part, the great operators, are not going to allow anything but high performance. If JJ and I are in Afghanistan on a mission and he sees me doing something where I'm violating standard operating procedures, I'm not following the procedures, I'm not following the plan, or where maybe I'm just lacking self-discipline, he will come over and he will, even if he's a peer, sort of bring it to my attention that I'm not following the plan, I'm not following the procedures. Even in the after action reviews, which in the business world we often call those debriefs, they would get pretty heated. If again, JJ saw me doing something on the mission in the after action, after the mission's over, he would bring it up in front of the group. And you would see some of these debriefs become very contentious, but he's doing it for a reason, not necessarily to call me directly out, but to make sure that I continue to perform as is required by all people within the organization. We talk a lot about the military, but I'll sort of end with this. I think padding the cord did an excellent job with the Netflix culture deck. And if you've not viewed the Netflix culture deck, the whole thing is about culture and performance. And in it, they say they are trying to hire a rock star into every position. Now, if you can get a rock star in every position, I define that as perfection. Perfection is very we accept nothing less than excellence. But Netflix has made it a point within the culture to say if they identify somebody who's a mediocre performer, is that they will push them out of the organization. And how they explain it, I love this part, is that they're actually setting that person up for success in the long term by going to find a company that's a better fit for that person. But I think that's the same within special operations, and that's the same within any business. Is we're constantly assessing our people to make sure that we have rock stars in all roles, all functions, and that's harder than most people think. Guys, would love to just open it up right now for initial perspectives on this, given your vast amount of experience. Let me start with JJ.
Yeah, I just wanted to circle back a little bit on peer accountability within the special operations community. Peer-to-peer is absolutely vital. That's what makes you try your absolute best every day, because the guy sitting next to you on the range is going to call you out. Every shot's got to be just as perfect as the one before. You got to be better than the guy right next to you, or that's going to happen. When you get into operations, it's far more important, because now we got people's lives thrown away. But even beyond peer evaluation or peer accountability, I had subordinates that told me, "Hey, boss, you're not doing that right, and you know better." And they snapped me right back into where I needed to be. Whether it was task saturation or just flagging the battle, something was happening where I wasn't making the right decision. Somebody who had clarity on it, or somebody who had a different perspective, would immediately step in and go, "Hey, we don't do it that way, boss. We need to step back and take another approach." And that was absolutely clutch. So fast forward, now I'm here at West Shore Home. Just a couple of days ago, one of my guys called me out and said, "Hey, boss, you didn't communicate well with me. We had a project. I didn't really understand what was going around, and it's your fault. You didn't explain this very well." And he was right. That was my bad. So when you have developed a team that is willing to have accountability up and down, left and right, you're starting to move in that right direction.
Want to move to Josh Wood. I mean, the one thing, and I know we're not going to give away any trade secrets here, is but you guys specifically filled the director of training and leadership. JJ, you're holding that position, but I mean, it speaks to the organization, the fact that I don't know if it's that you identified a need to step up performance or to give people the tools. Josh, I want to turn it over to you for overall perspectives, but I'd love to hear the history of why this position was created.
Sure. So one of the things we do that's out from the business side and the marketing side that's enabled us to differentiate ourselves in a pretty crowded marketplace, we're in home improvements, remodeling, is we talk about ourselves very differently than other companies do. If you Google 20 of our competitors, you see the same basic marketing talking points. And so, we started that way, and we just found that we were sort of getting lost in the sea of sameness. So we did a deep dive instead and said, let's tell an authentic story about who as a company we are. And let's draw in the customers that we really identify with who we are, that really look for the differentiator of our brand. And let's approach the market that way versus trying to cast the widest possible net and pull everybody in. Let's pull in the right customers. We've applied that same exact strategy to our talent acquisition. So we watched the Netflix deck maybe 100 times, just sort of thinking through that. If someone's not the right culture fit, free them up to go find a place where they are. And so we approach talent acquisition from the same way that we approach our marketing strategy, which is, this is who we are. This is our culture. We're very upfront about it. We're very proud of it. We speak about it very freely, and we have a great deal of internal consistency in how we talk about it. So we really are, I do my best, and I'll flatly tell candidates, especially for, leadership positions, my goal in this call is to scare you away. And if I can't, you're perfect. And if I can, then, I did us both a favor. So we're always looking to really, hone in on what the culture is, because that's how we're going to bring in those people who are going to fit in, who are going to be those rock stars for us. and who are going to help us grow. And so part of that is once they get in, having an apparatus to really make sure they're fully indoctrinated into the culture, into the mission, the vision, the values, as well as fully equipped to be successful. I mean, we're hiring them for their talent, for their perspectives, for their experiences, making sure that they have all the training that they need to really shine in the role that they're hired for. So yeah, I mean, training and development has been probably our biggest non-production initiative in the last 2 years. Just developing all those different training streams, different development streams, those relationships, and those patterns there.
Jim.
I can jump in here and piggyback on what Josh said. It's not surprising hearing what you just said. They're able to grow and succeed as quickly as they are. And I think my perspective from investing in early stage companies, they're often fairly small, but going through hyper growth. Is that the mistake people make is that growth they think is just a number game, and it's not. You go from 1 person to 2 people in your organization. That's 1%. You don't 2 to 4% growth. That's very different from going from 200 to 400, 400 to 800, 800 to 1600. But it isn't necessarily that less important or impactful. And I think that's really important for people to understand. As organizations get large, they do tend to get somewhat bureaucratic. And as Mike said before, if you're able to hire rock stars at every single position, that is perfection, and that's generally unattainable. But it doesn't mean that it's any less important that you take your foot off the gas when you're hiring, person 400 as opposed to person 4. I've been fortunate enough to be a CEO on a couple of occasions, in addition to being an investor. And I bring the same ethos that I learned and was trained and exercised when I was in the military. And I tell people up front, my job as a leader is to create an environment where the best people can do their best work. And so my responsibility is to create that environment and ultimately to find the best people. And their responsibility is to do the best work. And so if I'm failing in my job, meaning I'm not creating that environment, I'm not creating that culture where the best people can do their best work, they have an obligation, I believe, they have a duty to actually come to me and tell me that that environment is not conducive to their best work. And similarly, if they're not doing their best work, or if for whatever reason they're not the right people, I have a duty and an obligation to tell them that, both personally and with regard to the organization as a whole. Not surprisingly, coming from the venture community, I think about things in terms of investment. Investing in a human being, investing in an employee is a really big deal. And there are lots of HR folks, and you've seen now more lately as people have become more important, the title change from human resources to chief people officer, and other types of title changes to reflect the fact that people are so important. But that investment in those individuals is key, because the sunk cost, the cost of bringing someone on who doesn't work, finding out over a period of months or maybe years that they're not the right people, having to jettison that person, recruit, hire another person, train them up, get them up to speed, that's real time and that's real money. So it's extremely important to invest in the hiring process, in the training process, and then making sure that environment and that culture is somewhere where the person that you've recruited in thrive. And so you have to invest in those people, and you also have to invest in that culture. People have heard me say before, something I've learned in the military: mission first, but people always. And that people always is critically important to what we're talking about now. And then the next thing I would say is I call them the 3 L's: you lead, you learn, and you love. The 3 questions I ask my people are, 1, are you committed to excellence? 2, can I trust you? And 3, do you care about me? No one really knows, or cares rather, how much you know until they know how much you care. And so you've got to make it a human interaction and not just an employee-employer interaction, but you've got to know and they've got to know that you're committed to excellence and they are the same. Next, I would say is trust but verify. Mike talked about John Doerr's book about measure what matters. In the military, we said what we called it was don't expect what you don't inspect. Just because you've hired a rock star doesn't mean that if you don't give them the right instruction, if you don't create the right parameters, if you don't set the objectives correctly, that they won't fail. They're not mind readers, and they have their own way of doing things, which may be fundamentally different than what ties into the overall strategy of the company. And that's really important. And then the last thing I would say is, a lot of people confuse what the word confidence means. And I think particularly when you're talking about folks like Mike and others on this panel who've been in elite units, and I've been fortunate to be in and around special operations during my time in the military, specifically with Special Operations Aviation Group Task Force. There are some really, really impressive people. And some do think well of themselves, and well they should, because they're committed to excellence and they're achieving excellence. But confidence for me at the end of the day is more about humility and accountability. It's about having the self-esteem and the self-confidence internally to learn. It's about having the self-confidence, as you heard earlier, for a subordinate to come to you and say, hey boss, you screwed this up, and here's why, and here's how it impacted the mission. And rather than being defensive about it, opening up and bringing some perspective and actually learning from it. And so if you can learn and grow, if you can continue to be humble and accountable, it gives you the credibility to demand the same from others. And that creates the kind of culture where failure actually doesn't happen. Only learning happens, and only growth happens, and ultimately only success happens.
Hey, I'm going to jump right on that. And based on Will's question right here, I was thinking about that with Netflix. I kind of despise this concept of hiring a rock star because it's focused, the rock star is focused on one person and not a team. Spent a third of my career at our training detachment. So I was running the training, not for our basic, our selection, but actual SEALs going through training. And I saw it again and again and again, where platoons and task units would come through full of rock stars, right? And just do terrible during training. And then have another task unit or platoon by comparison come through, not a whole lot of experience. Everybody's, no one's a super great triathlete and super fast on the pistol, but they all know how to work together and they can get the job done, and they would actually maul anything that I could throw in front of them, out there in the training thing. When I try to examine what made the SEAL team specifically, and what I believe special operations specifically really good up on this, is that we have programmed into our culture that we do these debriefs, and we do them all the time. So anytime we finish anything, and sometimes it might be as simple as like doing a monster mash, and that's a big physical training evolution we might do on a Friday where we're broken into teams. Like afterwards, we'll get together and we'll go, hey, what did we do wrong and what can we do better? And when you walk into the debrief, the rank comes off. Everybody has valuable input. And I'll tell you, it takes practice. You've got to practice being humble enough to accept critique from a subordinate. You have to practice being humble enough to be able to take on critique from someone who has maybe half or a quarter of the experience you do. And it's not something that happens overnight. It's something that you have to build into your standard, and everyone has to get comfortable that when you go into the debrief room that they're not going to take things personally, because that's the way you're going to get better. And when you get good at it, you're an organization that becomes very agile and can adapt and change to any given situation, because you're able to look back and see what's going on, take feedback, and then actually enact that feedback and move forward. This is why I feel like Special Operation Forces as a whole are really successful in anything they do after they leave those communities, because we're just not locked into these things. But most importantly, because we're used to this debrief situation and we do them all the time, and we're used to hearing people that we outrank give us good, valuable feedback.
Let me follow Jason on that. Special Forces assessment selection has three parts. An individual week where it's just assessments, has a lot to do with physical requirements and predictive index kind of scores and a bunch of like tests just to find out what they're doing. Week 2, team week. So when we're talking about Jimmy Corbett's question about hey, are you hiring a rock star and how does that work when it comes to team week? I'll tell you, I saw some people I thought were absolute animals at selection. Fit, strong, fast, could do it all. Could not work as a member of the team. Could not put their ego aside and say, hey, I need to slow down 5% so this person can elevate the entire team 10%. And we saw them get washed out just quickly. People that either could not wrap their head around the fact that it wasn't and it never will be an individual event. It's always going to be a team event, or those that were just unwilling to help those to their left and right. And out they went. And sometimes you watched it happen and you shook your head and you just marveled at the fact that somebody just missed an amazing opportunity. So fast forward again, now I'm at West Shore Home. We use the term rock star all the time. But every time we talk about someone who's a rock star, it's because their team is crushing it. And it's never about the individual. We may say, hey, so-and-so, at this branch is an absolute rock star. Or, hey, if we're gonna train people and we want them to shadow somewhere, let's send them down, down to this branch because that guy's a rock star. That means he has built a team that is completely crushing our expectations. And so, yeah, Jimmy, you're absolutely right. An individual rock star, someone that's a prima donna and just is really, really good at a single thing, never going to make it. You've got to be well-rounded. You've got to be able to do multiple things. But most importantly, you've got to be able to build those things around you. The U.S. Army's definition of leadership is provide purpose, direction, motivation to accomplish the mission and improve the organization. And to me, that's one of the most important parts to it. How is it that you, in all of your talent, are going to make those around you just as talented? One person, never going to make money. A team, going to make a ton of money.
Yeah, I'd jump in here and say that, when I hear the term rock star, I know exactly what Jason's talking about. We've all met that guy who can't check his ego, not humble, self-obsessed, self-absorbed, thinks he's God's gift to whatever he's doing. I think in the context of our business, for sure, I would guess Netflix, when they say rock star, they're talking about just raw talent, just the ability to just crank out high quality work at the right pace at the right time. And so, yeah, to the question that was asked, you do have to kind of define rock star to include that ability to check ego, ability to be part of a team, ability to get on board with the mission and what's going on. So at West Shore, if we meet somebody who has talent, that we would define as a rock star just because of their character, their drive, their alignment with our core values, their general demeanor and cultural fit. We hire them sometimes out of position because these people are going to be rock stars for us no matter where we put them. But part of that is we know they're going to fit in with the team and they're going to make everyone around them better versus being so self-obsessed and self-absorbed that they bring the production of the team down. We simply won't tolerate prima donnas, to use the term JJ used. They don't make it here because we're absolutely all about the team mission and moving the ball down the field together.
Josh, I actually ran into the same scenario, and Jason, I didn't define they define what a rock star is, and it goes to what Josh Wood said. When in the book we talked about A players, a lot of people, I guess, automatically thought alpha males, and that we couldn't. That is farthest from what we're talking about. This is not about a man or woman. It's just about, as you said, raw talent. And what we found about A players are those people that can absolutely put their ego in check and identify younger talent, like JJ said, people that push them to be better as well, even though they're junior leaders within the organization. Hey, yeah, I want to hit two things here, guys. One, Jim brought this up, and there's a lot of businesses that don't do this well, and sometimes the military didn't do this well. But Jim said, "Don't expect what you don't inspect." And so let me rephrase that. How I interpreted that, Jim, is scoreboard. If you don't have a scoreboard or a way of articulating where people are at in terms of either hard metrics or soft metrics, and you're not providing coaching and feedback, then there's no mechanism for them to improve. I think it is a hit on you as a leader if you just bring somebody in after 3 months of working on the job and say, "Hey, you're underperforming." To hit them 3 months after and just say, "Hey, you're underperforming," you need to be providing that feedback, and it goes to the plan that I think JJ and Josh have, and why they created the role with the director of training and leadership development. Let me go around the room. I want to ask you guys, what do you do, or maybe there's some great businesses you've seen that have implemented this. What are you guys doing to set expectations from the start? Because I know we did it in the soft community. I know when you got to your platoon, they're like, "Hey, listen, we hold a high bar, and this is exactly what we expect of you. And if we see you falling below that bar, we'll come to you. We'll let you know, and we'll identify ways to raise your performance." Within the private sector, what are you guys doing to level expectations up front so that people understand, hey, this is we have a healthy, competitive, high-performing environment here, and we're always pushing ourselves. Open game.
Yeah, I can jump on this right quick. When this topic came up, the first person I went and talked to was our director of recruiting. And one of the very first things he said was, be very transparent about your culture. You can afford to be selective. Pick the right people from the beginning and set that expectation immediately. Hey, we work hard, we work fast, we expect people to do the exact same thing. We're going to reward you handsomely, but we're damn sure going to ask that you just work your guts out throughout the day. And that took me right back to my first day of selection, when that cadre got up on the counter or up on the platform in his black hat. He just said, "Hey, look to the left and right. Most people aren't going to be standing here in 3 weeks' time." And he was right. But he let people know right off the bat, we will not accept anything but the absolute best. And the best means more than just individual. It means that teamwork. So being selective and saying, hey, we're not just going to mass produce. We're not going to take everyone off the street. We're going to take the right people. We're going to look at them as an individual and see how they fit with us. Because we have something that works well. We have something that's going in the right direction and growing because we're bringing in the absolute right people. So, don't be afraid of who you are, because you need people. Find people that will work with what you are.
Yeah, I think that's a really great answer, JJ. If I could just build on that a little bit, Mike, to your question, those standards are going to vary depending on the kind of industry that you're in, the stage of the company that you're in, the size of the company, et cetera. There are early days when people need to be a Swiss Army knife. They need to be able to play multiple roles, wear different hats. And as an organization grows, then there's a desire and a need for specificity. But as JJ said, there's a reason why Team Week comes after Team Week and not necessarily before. There has to be some sort of baseline standard that you as an organization adhere to, and everyone has to meet that minimum threshold. Again, it can be attitude, it can be a certain talent level. In the military, it often included a physical component. In the private sector, it's a softer piece regarding work ethic or attitude. But in any event, there has to be some sort of baseline piece. And then when you get to the specifics, based on your size and your industry, et cetera, the critical thing is A, to have standards, and then B, probably even more importantly, to communicate them so people know exactly what they are. I take it as a leadership sort of mantra, but also as a cultural imperative. And I call them the 4 C's. You have to communicate, you have to coordinate, you have to cooperate, and you have to do it with consistency. And what that means is we're all talking to one another. That feedback loop that you've heard weave through this conversation is critical to having virtuosity when it comes to teamwork and growth. It has to flow from top down, has to flow from bottom up. Two, people have to be communicating not only vertically but horizontally within the organization. They need to understand that they're a part of bigger. They're a bigger part of something than just themselves, and that someone else's success is their success. Their success is someone else's success, and be willing to leverage the skill sets of others to achieve that overall vision. And again, you have to do it with consistency, not only when you need help, not only when you're failing, but more often than not, when you're succeeding, when you're going really fast, when you're at that cutting edge, when you're at the bleeding edge. In many ways, that's the point at which you need help the most, because things are coming at you so fast and the op tempo is such that if you're not careful and you're not getting help, you can get yourself out of control. And so I think the key is to have something well-defined, and then to communicate it, and then to communicate it again and communicate it again and again, to make sure everyone understands what the standard is, and that every task within that standard and within the overall strategy is understood, supervised, and accomplished on a daily basis.
Hey, one of the things that I did late in my career, I wish I'd started a lot earlier, was starting doing a pretty detailed initial counseling. And I did it for the 3 levels of leadership below me. So that was it. I would sit down and tell each person, hey, these are your roles and responsibilities inside this organization. Here's the decisions that you can make at your level. Here's what I need you to come to me for. And here are my expectations for your behavior. And it cleaned everything up, because then everybody had something that they could refer to. And I'll tell you, after that, the amount of time that I had to spend doing written counselings went way down, because it could just be a quick verbal counseling where I pulled out a copy of my initial, counseling to that person. They had a copy, and I say, hey, here, line item number 7, we fell a little bit short of that today. Let's make sure we do better. But that always is gonna, it's just gonna make everything easier for you, and it's gonna force you to think through, hey, what do I need all the subordinates, or what actually does winning look like? And unfortunately, that's a lot of organizations don't really think through that prospect of what does winning look like? What is the right thing? Is it making money? Is it a satisfied customer base? Is it us having the best quality product out there? And it's worth thinking through.
Yeah, hey, Mike, if I may, I'm just going to jump in real quick on what you just said, because I think it's really important. One of the parameters that I've seen people set is really 2 sets of phrases. On the low end, there's this phrase: if the minimum wasn't good enough, they wouldn't call it the minimum. Right? So what is the minimum? What's the minimum that you expect to be able to stick around here? And on the other side of that spectrum, and it's going to sound counterintuitive when I say it, it's good enough is a business decision. Well, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is you can be full out on one particular aspect or one particular quality that you think ranks really high. At some point, if you're spending 100% of your time on that and not any time on the other 4 or 5 factors that ultimately make you successful, you're going to fail. And so the question is, again, when you define those standards, it's not just one standard. It's understanding the overall strategy. It's understanding the what. It's understanding the why, so that people can be more independent and entrepreneurial and do the things you need them to do when you're not around to achieve the overall goal, if that goal is clearly communicated. And then giving them the tools and the resources and the feedback and the confidence and the courage, right? Sometimes you have to carry around the carrot. Sometimes you have to carry around the stick. Sometimes you carry around the pom-poms. It's a kick in the butt. It's a slap on the back. Sometimes it's a pat on the butt. But whatever it takes, if those goals and that strategy and that why is clearly communicated, people will figure it out. If you've recruited well and you're supporting them well, they'll figure out how to get to where you need to go. You don't need to hold their hands the whole way.
Yeah, I think this conversation about creating context and establishing standards is absolutely the critical conversation. Without these direct conversations, without that written counseling, without those standards that must be adhered to, clearly communicated from the start, you're going to create a culture where mediocrity flourishes and failure is a regular thing. So West Shore Home, I think, goes above and beyond a lot of private sector companies I've worked in that we require all of our managers to meet monthly for a formal counseling with all of their subordinate employees, just to sort of review the role description and those standards and say, are you meeting, exceeding, or not meeting expectations? And we've gone further to say, even if you're meeting or exceeding expectations, we're still going to roll out a performance improvement plan because obviously our goal here is to get better every single day. But one of the things we do that I think takes it to the next level and helps us find the right candidates so that these expectations don't dissuade them and don't discourage them from joining us is, yes, we have minimum standards. Yes, we hold those. Yes, we honor that agreement with the employees. But the core question of our company is, what are we capable of? So from the very earliest conversations, the interview process, we're telling them our story is a question of self-actualization. How far can we take this thing? How much better today can we be than we were yesterday? And how much better can we be tomorrow than we are today? And as a collective, how far can that take us? And so we're really letting people know that, yes, there are minimum standards. And yes, you'll absolutely be successful here. But to really shine, to really stand out, to really get where you want to go, to really make the mark here, you've got to be just dying for the chance to prove yourself every single day and to get better. So, by having those standards and those conversations, we create the environment where people can take those risks and then really, really push to flourish and to grow.
Josh, that is amazing, and I'm going to start to wrap it up here. I think, Josh, really, we're going to have you back. This really goes into, this is why you really need a sound talent management system where you have solid evaluations to let people know where they stand, not only with their performance, but their leadership as well, and what steps they need to take to remain within the organization or move up to the next level, which, again, a lot of organizations, both business and military, sometimes are not well executed. The one thing I do look at, and we did touch on growth. Growth is a scary thing, but that's the whole point. We're all here to grow our companies. And when you grow your companies, that usually means additional headcount. Now, we're weary that we understand that each person that we bring into the organization either adds to the culture or subtracts to the culture. But I think, ultimately what I'm worried about is the sum of its parts. Each person contributes. But if I have an organization of 100 and I'm competing with another company within that same industry and they have a headcount of 100, what ultimately matters to me is that my aggregate performance as an organization is higher than my competition. Now, will there be some mediocre performers that exist in there? Absolutely. And we'll deal with those as the situation arises. But Josh, one thing we do here is we have these great conversations. Ultimately, we want to impact the subordinate leaders coming behind us. And Michelle is one of those leaders. She's with the marketing cell within EF Overwatch. And she's going to wrap up with the top 3 points that she took away from our discussion and how it impacts her as a leader. Michelle?
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, everybody, for this conversation. I know I learned a lot. So the first point that I got was from Mike in his introduction, that the level of talent in your organization ultimately depends on the people you have in your talent acquisition team. However, there is more to it than the people on your team. I know Josh Wood spoke about approaching talent acquisition the same way they approach marketing. Your brand attracts the talent that fits your company culture. So what message are you sending about your company? What expectations are you setting to the audience out there? And then lastly, Jim Brown spoke about investing in your company's culture and environment because it is more expensive to have a high turnover rate. And as he stated, mission first and people always.
Amazing. Thank you, Michelle. Hey, personally, I want to thank JJ, Josh Wood, Jim Brown, and Jason for joining us. Thank you to the audience for listening in. Hey, if you want to reach out to Talent War Group to get a guy like JJ or Jason Gardner or Jim Brown to come speak with your company, which they are exceptional speakers, please reach out to us. You can reach us at thetalentwar.com. Go to contact us. And please join us for future content, which you can find on both the EF Overwatch LinkedIn page as well as Talent War Group. We wish you all well, and we'll see you next time on the Talent War. Thanks, guys.